Hello, everyone. I'm Thomas Vick, Seth Wilson with me. We're the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. Today, we wanted to kind of talk about, you know, the life cycle of the law firm and kind of where you are when you're in the middle of it. So, Seth and I were kind of talking before the podcast here about kind of where we are and how do we manage, when we've got a lot of cases going on, how do we manage our time, our tasks, and things like that. And we wanted to kind of open it up and discuss how do we close cases when we're kind of in the middle and we're really, really busy. How do we actually get things done and out the door? So yeah, that's the topic for today, how to close cases. Seth, I'll just kind of open it up to you. What are some things that you think about when you've got a lot of caseload going on and you got to find a way to close cases?
It's a great question and great topic, Thomas. I know if you're just getting started in your practice, it's probably not the issue you're facing right away, but it will be quickly because oftentimes, even at the start, you're busy with cases, not all of which are actually generating revenue. And that is obviously very essential to keeping the doors open and the lights on and keeping the practice viable. And so I think that's a struggle that you will face as you're a practicing lawyer your entire career. Because I think the tendency for me personally is, well, if I finish this case, then I won't have anything else to do. And so that creeps into your thinking in the middle of the case. And that's a hard thing to overcome. And I think probably why our ethics rules in Indiana have that you have to overcome the tendency to procrastinate as one of the sort of aspirational goals of being an attorney. That's that tug that you feel in the middle of a case a lot of times as well. I don't want to finish this because I don't know where the next case is going to come from, or I don't want to finish this because I don't know how to finish it, or I have so much to do, I don't know where to start. And so, great topic of discussion for today to kind of tee that up and then help prioritize which gets done first. And so, we were talking off or just before we started recording, Thomas, about how you kind of think about this from an accounting perspective and what that looks like in terms of, how do you position the case in your thought process like it might be considered inventory in a traditional business sense?
Yeah, so I'm an estate planning attorney. I've got just a little bit of tax background, and when I was in law school, I took a short course called Accounting for Lawyers, just to make sure that I was familiar with accounting procedures and kind of the terminology and all of that. And it served me well. But one of the things I learned in that class was that a marker of a good business is that there is, particularly when you're selling goods, when you're selling widgets, you want to have a very little, you got to have a lot of turnover. So you've got to get items on the shelves, they're there for a little bit, and then you're replacing them. You're just constantly replacing them. And the smaller window of time that the item is actually on the shelf, the more efficient your business is, and consequently, your business might be more profitable because of that. And, as you accumulate cases, and this is the case with me, I've started to think about cases in that way. What is, the accounting term is like first in, first out. You've got to get the case in the door, you've got to do the work, and then you've got to get it out the door. And the quicker that you do that, not only are you going to get all of the compensation that the client has agreed to, you're going to get it quicker, and then you're going to free up more time for you to take on the next one. And the more that I have practiced, I've discovered kind of what you were just describing, that there is a hesitancy, a procrastination to finish out a case because there is an unknown factor about what's going to happen next. Where's the next case going to come from? And there is the hesitation of, I don't know how to close the case, or I don't have the time to close the case. And so you push it out, even though a lot of the work is already finished. It's just a matter of tying up the loose ends. And I've tried to become a little bit more aware of this issue and more diligent about it, that we really need to close the case so that we can open ourselves up for for more work to come. And I really think that if you don't close out the case efficiently, it becomes a drag on your law practice. There's a weight that comes with it that you're just not going to be able to. It's just going to hinder you in a lot of different other areas, and it may not be something that is actually tangible. It's just going to be kind of lurking behind the shadows, if you will. But I think it's really important that you make concerted efforts to close out the cases, even when the work has already been done in the main.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to be aware of what it is that's preventing you from getting that case finished. And I had a partner one time that said, the happy file is a closed file or something to that effect. And that always stuck with me of we're giving that resolution to a client. And so this is their maybe once a year interaction with an attorney or more or less, and so their perspective is a lot different than this is my everyday, all day. And so having that file completed for them is a really important step in their journey. And so you owe it to them, obviously, to be diligent and get things done. And I think you owe it to yourself and your other practice area growth to say, okay, what is it about this case that I can't get it done? Maybe it's, I don't know what to do. And so I think in those cases, you owe it to yourself and to the client to reach out to someone and get some advice on what to do next and make sure that you're not hesitating to get something done because of a lack of knowledge, or you haven't done the research, or you're just avoiding it because it's going to take extra time. And that's hard, right? And that's, as lawyers, we have the duty to become competent in what we're doing. And so we want to make sure that you're focusing on that and developing that knowledge base. So pay attention to the resistance to finish, identify what that is, and then craft a strategy to get around it. And like you say, just getting that through the pipeline, if you will, is better for you and the firm, and it's also better for the clients at the end of the day because they're happy that it's done. We talk about it around here as kind of the McDonald's rule of law. Folks got to the point where they wanted to go through the drive-through and get their deed at the end of the day, or I thought it would be just a one-time interaction and I'd have my estate plan done. Those you have to work on those expectations, but also being aware of the impact of the instant gratification that's in our society today, and the advent of I can just go to whatever AI tool and ask it a question and it's going to give me a very lengthy answer. Why can't I have my documents prepared in the same way? And so I think that's another reason for us as lawyers to get those things done and out the door as quickly as we can. So we're making sure that we're not seeking alternative ways to get our stuff done if we're a client.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying there. Be aware of what is holding you back from finishing it. And I think one thing you mentioned was get a system in place to close out the cases. If you're a family law attorney, after a divorce is finished, after the custody litigation is finished, get that motion to withdraw on file, get that disengagement letter out. That's the type of thing that we're talking about. These are just loose ends that have to be done every single time that you are filing an appearance in a case. You got to get out of it. Otherwise, when you retire, you're going to have a million motions to withdraw to do, and you don't want to do that. So you want to have a process in place and assign somebody in your office to do that. These are things that are routine. They can be done. I think in the estate administration context, there always has to be an accounting that's finished at the end of in estate administration. And so that's something that always has to take place. Make sure that there's somebody that's making the phone call to the client to make sure that we've got all the documents that we need in order to prepare that. And I think, in my practice, that's one delay that happens is we don't have the documents to be able to start the accounting. And really, if we want to make progress, all we have to do is make sure we get that phone call in that maybe will be a 10-minute phone call Client will bring the documents to us a few days later, and then we can get started. But if you delay that phone call, then you're going to be however many days delayed, before you can actually start the accounting. And so just take the small step, and then everything else will kind of fall in line after that.
Yeah. And that's a concept. We may have talked about this before because it's one that's been helpful for me just in general, is what David Allen, who wrote the book Getting Things Done, calls the 2-minute rule. If you can do the next action, whatever that is, within 2 minutes, don't write it down, just do it. And a lot of times the next action is, oh, I need to call the client, or I need to message the client in some way and ask for a response. And I think as you think about the timing of that, if it's Friday, you're now 2 days before you will potentially even get a response because of the impending weekend. And if it's another 3 days, now you're a week behind. And so
Yes.
you want to really be thinking like, boy, we really need to get this stuff out at the beginning of the week so that by the end of the week, we have it in. So if I do need to work on a Saturday to catch up from what was going on the week, I can do so. But then I don't want to put that pressure on my client to do things on their weekend either, right? So it's a balance between all of those. It's knowing your clients and your practice area and who works when. Those are all important considerations to have. But that's, I think, a really important thing when you're stuck on a project is try to identify that very next action that you can take to try to get the inertia started. And once it's started, then it's easy to take the next action and the next action. And if you're like me, then you get stuck in that and forget everything else you were doing that day. So you got to be careful about that extreme as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's all good stuff. Just taking the small step, taking that less than 2-minute step and getting the process rolling. I think that's really important. And, I think we've talked about this in the past that, when you have finished a job, finished a matter, closed it up, it does seem like it's a breath of fresh air. It's a breath of fresh air for the client, hopefully, but then also for your practice. And it gives you more time and opportunity. It might be that you've got another one that you got to close. It might be that you're in the middle of the work of another matter. Maybe you got to go out there and rainmake and find another, uh, referral partner, another networking lunch that you got to go to, that kind of thing. All of that will help you to see those opportunities if you close out cases in an efficient manner and just don't let them drag and drag and drag.
Yeah. And I want to circle back to something you said earlier, which is really important from the case administration side internally. And that is getting your client letters out to say, we're done with the case. The final invoicing gets sent out, the withdrawals with the court if that's necessary, but also internally making sure that you're closing those matters out. We talked about Clio a lot here on the podcast, and it has a feature where you can enter a closed date, and you want to decide, is the closed date the date I choose to close the case and there's still work to do, or is the close date when I get the closing letter sent, or is it when I get the order from the court? And you want to define what that is, but make sure that those cases get closed and are documented appropriately so that you know it's out of your mind and there's not more to do. There's a lot of times I've seen attorneys that say, I'm done with the case, so therefore I'm going to close it. Well, did you close the paper file? What did you do with all the emails? Are they all saved somewhere? Do we know when we can destroy the file from a document retention program? Do we know if we need to keep everything in the file or do we need to return some of it to the client? And so you need to think through that as part of that process as well. And I think a lot of that may give rise to the resistance of closing out a file, because in certain times you're thinking, well, that's not billable work because this is just kind of the closeout administration of that. Remember, you agreed to this at the beginning, and that's the completion includes each of those steps beyond just the legal work, but making sure that as you work in your business and on your business, that part is handled. And so you don't have that residual information there hanging around when it probably shouldn't have if the matter's been closed an appropriate amount of time, and you can move that on from a retention policy.
Yeah, and I use the phrase breath of fresh air whenever you close the file. I think whenever you move it from open to closed in Clio, whatever law practice management program that you have, or you move it to another stage in the pipeline in Clio or whatever it might be, that movement, I think it generates some endorphins. I don't have the science on it, but it feels good to see that progress. And the more that you do that, the better you're going to feel about the movement of your practice and where it's going. I think having those procedures and making them meaningful is really important. Like when I have meetings with my team, we're looking at what cases can we close out. And if we can close out 4 or 5 in a meeting and say, yeah, we have sent that disengagement letter. I've got a process in place where I meet with my estate planning paralegal and we talk about the cases, but then if there are disengagement letters that need to be signed, I'll sign them right there in the meeting, and then we'll close out the matter in Clio, and then we're done. And it feels really good to be able to close out cases like that and know that we're clearing out space for the next round for next week to close out some more.
Yeah, I think especially with knowledge work, it's hard to quantify what we do because almost everything nowadays is digital. Now, in the estate planning world, we actually get to print out binders that have paper that people sign, and you actually see the result of the work when that is done, or you may physically have that on a shelf and it's moving through a progression. But when you mow your yard, it's pretty easy to see the progress that's being
I
made
love
and
it.
what's left to do,
Yeah.
right? Or I guess more appropriate for this time of year, shoveling your driveway. But
Don't love it.
you could at least see that I did this much and I have this much to do. And there's various ways to do that from a digital perspective. But as you mentioned, those pipelines and those matter stages, that's also helpful because you see it one step closer to the end of that pipeline. And once you get it there visually, okay, that means we've done a lot of work to get it there. And you start to feel, okay, I can handle what's left because that's a smaller list now than it was before. And we're making progress. And that's a good thing. And it's going to be different for every person in terms of how you sort of visualize the work that you have to do from a knowledge perspective. But anything you can do to help quantify that for yourself and make it feel like you're moving forward and not just going in circles, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I also might mention that in Clio, and depending on what level of service you have with Clio, in that pipeline that they have, it says how many days the matter has been in that particular stage in the pipeline. And if you've got one in there that has been in there for 300 days, that means it hasn't moved. Maybe that's a problem. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's active litigation going on and it's not going to be done for 5 more years. But, there may be a problem there that you need to address. And it's a great way of keeping track. I think when you become busy, the tendency is that you lose sight of the big picture. And so it's really important to have a system so that you can take a bird's eye view of your practice and see what's going on, what's doing well, what needs some time and attention, and be able to act accordingly.
Yeah, great point there. And the other side of that, from a Clio perspective or any tool that you use, is review it with some degree of regularity. So if you have a list of matters that you're committed to at some point and that has changed for whatever reason, make sure you have that communication with the client and just say, hey, I got a lot busier than I thought. I'm really not going to be able to give your matter the time and attention it deserves. I need to get you somewhere else. They will appreciate it and you will save yourself a lot of headache down the road. And a lot of times, especially as you're starting out, that seems like a foreign concept. I can't get my head around that because I would never turn away work or what have you. But there are times when you take something on that maybe it's just a little over your experience level and you needed to co-counsel with somebody else. But seek that help right away if you're finding yourself in that situation, because if that matter gets to be 60, 90 days, that's not a good scenario for you oftentimes.
Yep. And unfortunately, yeah, you see disciplinary cases from time to time where cases get ignored, the attorney's cases get ignored for whatever reason, client gets upset, files a disciplinary complaint, and then you've got to respond to that, and you don't want to get into that position ever. So just stay on top of your cases, stay on top of what's going on in your practice, and be able to know at any point in time where each particular case is. I think that's the duty of competency, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, one other thing I just made me think about this week is I had a client from many years ago call, and they called a number that exists on the internet somewhere. They did a Google search for my name and found this number, but I don't know where it is or where it came from. So I was checking my personal email account and it showed up there. It was like, oh my goodness. And I think there were 2 calls because I'd missed and a couple days had gone by. So you've got to be diligent about what's out there as well. So I've found where that number is and was like, okay, now I got to re-record the voicemail here and make sure that it's pointing to the most accurate information. But if you've been around for a while and or had different things through college and law school in terms of contact, make sure all of those things are feeding in as well, because you may have people trying to contact you that you didn't even realize were trying to get a hold of you. And that's obviously something you want to make sure that you're returning those calls on a quick basis for folks and keep that communication line clear and current.
Yeah. Well, I think we've given folks a lot to think about. I think that was a great podcast, Seth. Appreciate all the insight there in the conversation. Of course, this is the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. We've got a YouTube channel. We encourage you to go and subscribe to the YouTube channel and go to anywhere else that you can get your podcasts and subscribe, follow us, and tell other attorneys about us. We definitely want to be a resource to attorneys that are looking to launch their law practices or are currently in solo or small firm practices. We just want to help them to be successful. I think that covers it as far as where to find us. Seth, what's your email again for Lifetime Legacy Lawyers?
Mine and yours are just both our first name. So Seth at lifetimelegacylawyers.com or Thomas at lifetimelegacylawyers.com. Happy to answer any questions that we can for you, or leave a comment below the video on the YouTube channel or in your podcast app. We'll have the show notes there so you can reach out to us easily.
All right. Thank you, Seth. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Thomas.